Welcome back, fellow Earthlings. My name is Rogan and I am the mysterious stoner in the bowler. Picking up from where we left off from last week, I was a new convert to Christianity and I was being trained to take part in church. Still a very young lad at this time. Over the next several years, as I was learning the fine print of what it meant to be a Christian, the government started giving missionaries in the foreign country a wee bit of trouble. First, they started shortening the length of time we were allowed to stay there on our visas. And then they started making it difficult just to get the visas in the first place. In a couple of years, my parents and I were the only family of missionaries left on the mission field, and maybe one or two other single missionaries. And then the government decided to take it up one more notch. We had just arrived in the country, touched down in the capital, and then we were going to take a train or a car to where we lived. I went through customs, my mum went through customs, and then my dad went through customs and didn't get any further. See, the government had been compiling a list of all the missionaries that had been coming. And everyone whose name was on that list was no longer allowed back into the country. I don't know the reason behind why the government wanted to do this, but my father was on the list, and they told him, you can take your wife and son back with you, or you can leave them here, but you are going back to your home country. You're not getting in. By now, we had been missionaries for a total of 10 years. And just like that, it was over. Of course, we all went back to the home country together. My father, he tried to get another visa, but it didn't work out. They wouldn't give him another one, ever. He was officially blacklisted. By this time, the rest of our relatives had migrated to the States from our home country. So my dad figured, what better time to join the rest of the family than now that we're not missionaries anymore. It was a lot of change in a short amount of time. And it took some getting used to, especially getting used to having complete strangers around me already know English. So my father started working with the local churches, specifically the ones affiliated with my relatives that were already in the States, that were going to those churches. And my mom was teaching Spanish in a nearby Christian school, and I continued to be homeschooled. Reason I think being because, well, my parents had 4 out of 5 children who were professing Christians. So they likely figured their methods were working just fine. The thing is, my main teacher had always been my mom. So when she left to start teaching at this Christian school, I was left to do most of the work on my own. Probably not the best plan for how to educate your children, especially if they have attention deficit disorder. But I was about to get a whole different kind of education because the main church my dad was working at had kids there that were actually my age. There wasn't even that many of them, but it was in this group of kids that I would meet my best friend as well as my first crush. I had just turned 13, and my social skills were still total garbage, meaning it would have taken me a lot longer to warm up to everyone. But fortunately, my friend made it a lot easier on me by making it a point to introduce himself to me. We'll call him Salem. Salem actually had an idea of my experiences, shelteredness, and lack of exposure because he had been homeschooled himself for a few years previously, and his own dad's parents had also been missionaries on a foreign field for a few years. We became friends very quickly. But Salem's parents weren't nearly as strict or conservative as my own. So Salem was exposed to a lot more than I had ever been. And because he was a little familiar with a bit of what I had already been through, he knew how much I had missed out on, and he freely shared with me everything he had been exposed to. He educated me on American football, basketball. He showed me movies, introduced me to all kinds of different genres of music that I had no idea even existed. And I loved almost every single bit of it. But he also had some unique experiences of his own, which for personal and obvious reasons I cannot share here. But he shared his relevant world wisdom and knowledge and experiences with me to try and help me get on the same level with all the rest of the kids that were my age. We spent so much time together over the following years that people in church actually started a rumor that Salem and I were, well, mostly me, were homosexuals. The reason why they didn't suspect Salem as much of being a homosexual was because he was actually a ladies' man. The only reason he was even part of the rumor was because Christians believe that homosexuality is a choice. But the rumor circulated around me more because I hardly ever went out of my way to talk to girls. It's as if they, and even my parents, had forgotten that I had no social skills or practice when it came to talking to girls. I was fat and chunky, not an attractive male specimen, and there was only one dateable girl at this first church that we went to. And she was moved out by the time I was old enough to date. And then when we moved to a different church later on, that church had no kids my age at all. No girls. I never had anyone in the female gender of my age to speak to on a regular, often basis in person who I could get to know to even have a chance at getting into a normal, typical relationship. So they just thought I was gay. And no one even bothered to ask me if the rumor was true. I didn't even know about the rumor until I was already an adult. What's more, Salem was trying to help me with that too. He was teaching me his skills, passing on what he learned, about being a ladies' man to me to try and help me get my own girlfriend. And without him, I probably never would have even tried. In fact, let me tell you about the first time I ever asked a girl out. It was when I was 15, so 2 years later, and I had developed my first crush, which, if you haven't put two and two together yet, by the way, was the one girl at the church I was going to. I didn't ask her at church, though. Every year, families typically send their kids to a summer camp of some kind, right? Well, Christians do the same thing. They send their kids to Christian camp, which is usually for a week or two. And it wasn't all religion. There was plenty of fun, and the camp did a really good job of mixing things up every year. At the end of every camp week, there would be a banquet for the campers. And I don't know if the adults knew about this or not, but it was customary among the campers for the guys to ask the girls to go with them to the banquet as kind of like a date. So I was 15 and at this camp when I told Salem that I was interested in this girl from our church. I wasn't planning on asking her to the banquet because I was still very chunky and I had barely said a word to her in the past 2 years because ever since I had seen her and my puberty had kicked in, she looked like a goddess to me. And I was a chunky looking pig. So of course I wasn't going to ask her to the banquet. But Salem did everything in his power to convince me that I should try. And it took a good bit of convincing. But eventually, I worked up the courage and I asked her if she would go with me to the banquet. And naturally, she turned me down. But it helped me be able to ask other girls out in the future, as well as be able to continue to take rejection. But I didn't get rejected every time. And we'll get to those times later on. But now we are at the end of the video. So if you have enjoyed it in any sort of respect, please leave a like, consider sharing, and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Stay safe, and I hope I will see you next Saturday. Till next time, my friends, farewell.